You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week we're joined by Dr. Dena L. Gassner, Senior Research Scientist at AJ Drexel, Autism Advocate, and let me go back and redo that paragraph, sorry. This week, we're joined by Dr. Dena L. Gassner, Senior Research Scientist at AJ Drexel, an autism advocate and member of the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee. That's the IACC. Dena is rewriting the narrative around autistic identity, challenging stereotypes and advocating for gender diversity and inclusivity in autism research and policy. Her personal journey as a proud autistic mother adds a deeply relatable perspective to her work. And she teaches through storytelling to inspire and inform. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Dena Gassner.
Hi, Jeff. It's so nice to be here with you.
Well, I'm very interested to learn from you today, Dena. It's a topic that I think has been stifled recently, and I think that we need to be talking about more and more because it's the prevalence of being able to look at people that identify differently within the autistic community and who have different perspectives and different experiences with life, is that oftentimes we group autistics into a single category. I think that's wrong. We don't do that with anybody else in our population. And I think that it's nice for us to be able to talk about the differences, talk about the advocacy work, talk about the experiences of individuals in a way that I think you'll be able to highlight for us. But before we go there, I love for our guests to give us a little bit of a background, to tell us a little bit about what inspired your work, your research, your advocacy. So can you tell us about your personal journey and how being autistic individual and shaped that work that you're working on?
Sure. So I was never identified as being disabled as a child. Most of the supports that I got very informally. Often I would just have a cloudburst and have trouble making deadlines or navigating the multitasking associated with academics. And I went to a very small school in Appalachia for my undergrad on a Colonel Sanders scholarship, and Kentucky Fried Chicken and some really generous people helped me get through their programming. Many of our professors were from Indiana University, so they were high caliber faculty members that wanted a slower pace of life. So I had a really rich academic experience. For those who don't think that small schools serve well, I'll just remind them that as a double humanities major, there were only 3 other people in my Shakespeare class.
So nice.
So trust me when I tell you, we had to know the content. Mm-hmm. So there I was with my double major. I thought I had a career in front of me as a property manager. That was what I was doing as I was selling real estate. And I married and I had 2 children. And it would turn out later that both of my kids are neurodivergent. My daughter, who's almost 40 now, has attention difficulties but is a brilliant superstar and performs very, very well in life. And then I have a son who's 4 years younger than her, who was diagnosed at 3 with autism. So he was diagnosed very early on. He had a lot of developmental delays. He struggled a great deal with verbal communication, personal care, body autonomy. And we were told that he had an intellectual disability and that he would be what we would now, some people refer to as profound autism. I don't use that language, but others do. And so over time, he continued to evolve. And the happy ending story is he's doing very well, lived on his own for his 4 years of college, graduated from Marshall. And we did no ABA, we did no behavioral intervention. I felt very guilty for that because back then we were told that was the best. And of course, you want the best for your children. But we did not do that. We instead did what insurance would cover. So we did a lot of occupational therapy. We tried to provide him early access to technology. That was denied repeatedly by multiple school systems. And I think that was a real stumbling block for him, but he continued to persist. The result of that was that he was just dependent on others to communicate what he knew. He has to use dictation, although he keyboards 32 words a minute, and he touch types. So if he had been given the technology sooner, I think he would have been a little more independent in school. But he did very well. But in the midst of this, of course, this pulled me in a completely different direction in life. And I started attending a lot of autism conferences to learn more and more and more, because that's what moms do. And it turned out that I would meet women who mirrored my expression of autism. I don't look anything like my son. My son is sort of like, happy-go-lucky, kind of in a little bit of a naivete bubble, academically struggled a great deal. I, on the other hand, would have been referred to, if I'd been identified at all, as probably twice exceptional, right? Gifted academically, but very LD in mathematics. And I was struggling, obviously, with social relationships at that point. And so meeting other women who were academically gifted, but socially challenged, I started to look in the mirror a little differently. And through the work of some of the earlier authors, Dawn Prince Hughes, the writings of Valerie Paradis, the writings of Leanne Holiday Willie, I started to put together morsels and pieces that I didn't find about my identity by reading, say, for example, Temple Grandin, because my manifestation is very different than hers. And so I was struggling to just manage day to day. I was misdiagnosed with bipolar, which happens frequently to women on the spectrum. Bipolar and personality conditions often get misdiagnosed. I was over-medicated, lost a solid 10 years of my life and my children's lives on multiple medications for things I didn't need. And I finally broke through. I finally found a psychiatrist that detoxed me off of all the drugs. And I started to go back to school. I got my master's degree when I had two little kids under 8 that didn't sleep at night. And actually, the reason for all my difficulties was related to sleep disorder, not being able to sleep at night because of their needs, and just having poor quality sleep resulted in this snowballing of symptomology that was creating difficulties for me. So I would not be diagnosed until I was 40. And my son was diagnosed at 3. So we have very different trajectories, very different outcomes. The greatest of which is that my son never knew a day where being disabled and getting services was something he should be ashamed of, as compared to me being thrust into the misnomer of independence. I think it's a double standard for disabled people, because no one on this planet is independent. We're interdependent and collaborative if we're healthy and we're in relationship and community. But I bought into that I was supposed to be independent and self-sufficient. And although I did a lot for other people, it never occurred to me to ask for support. So flash forward, my kiddo did well when he went to Marshall, and he was doing so well in university there. I packed my bags and went to Long Island and started to pursue my PhD, which I just finished in January at 67.
Congrats.
So that's how I came to be doing what I'm doing.
Well, I mean, and we appreciate, and I appreciate you sharing the journey, because I think that ties so well into everything we're going to be talking about today, both your son's journey and your journey. Is that when we look at neurodivergence, when we look at autism in general, is that oftentimes you find where people have a set mindset of what this is, what the package of how to support or how to listen or how to be able to create an empowering environment needs to be. And your story, your description helps to paint the picture that this is still individualized. Every little aspect, every piece that somebody experiences throughout their life, and things that will help to make their life more enriched, has to be looked at through the lens of that one individual and how they're experiencing their life. So when you're looking at your experience and being thrust into environments or maybe misunderstood by the medical professionals who are prescribing medications, or maybe even a job setting, because I've heard a lot of autistics and neurodivergents, of people who have gone into work settings and didn't feel understood or didn't know how to be able to perform in the way that they knew they were capable of because of the barriers that were set up in the work community. What do the stereotypes of autism or the inability to recognize that somebody might be neurodivergent, what does that cause for somebody internally as they're experiencing kind of maybe that lack of being able to fit into the environment that they're trying so hard to be a part of?
Well, for me personally, as you said, Jeff, it's very individual, so that's all I can really speak from. But for me personally, I developed language very early on. I'm hyperlexic. I was reading profusely as a very young girl, and I've developed this very intellectual but communicative way of using language. And I use that phrase, using language, to describe it because very rarely do I communicate spontaneously. If you go back and you listen to multiple podcasts I've done or interviews I've done, you'll find the repetition there. You'll hear the echolalia. And because I was trying to fit into these very academic or governmental policy-driven communities, I learned how to borrow that language, that technical language, to, I thought, to be taken more seriously. What it would take me far too long to figure out is that many people found it very threatening and intimidating. And they presume a lot of competency that actually is far beyond what I really have. I was my best friend from college. I was just talking to her this week, and we were talking about putting some contact paper down in a cabinet in my house. And she says, well, all you have to do is cut and measure. And I go, now you're asking me to do a math thing. And she goes, oh, it's no big deal. And I said, how long have you known me? You've known me since we were 18. It's not just a math thing for me. But the way I sound and the primitive level of my mathematic competency is so dichotomous that people just can't make their heads get around it. Like it's just too much. So quite often in the workplace, I found that to be a real barrier, in that either people were threatened or intimidated, or I reminded them of someone. I didn't even know people so could not like you because of someone you reminded them of. That was really like world shifting for me. And so in many ways, I was just so naive and I didn't understand how I was coming across. So I always tell people that when they're getting their autism diagnosis, especially those of us diagnosed late due to gender bias and presentation bias, that the steps are, what is autism? Like it's a 101 class. How do I experience the world differently because I'm autistic? How does the world explain and understand my autism differently because of how I experience the world? And then what can I use as a tool or a strategy to close the gap between us? So I learned to use accommodations. I've learned to try to minimize energy output, whether it's cognitive or physical. I work extremely hard on work-life balance to maintain my physical well-being and to make sure my sleep, which is my Achilles, does not get disrupted. But it's taken me till 67 years old to put all of that together. And so what I try to do, whether it's in my research, my clinical practice, my work in the community, like I'm doing with you, I try to help people through that sequence of integrating their diagnosis. Because until you do that, you feel like you're just free falling through time and space and nothing seems to make sense.
Yeah,
and
well,
so we give people a piece of paper with a diagnosis, but we don't help them through that process of integrating it. So that's what I kind of, if I were going to pinpoint the primary loci of what I do, everything is derived from that.
Yeah, I mean, just even hearing some of the examples that you provided, just the echolalia that you kind of utilize in order to be able to clarify your message the way that you want to be able to do, and to be able to plan and organize some of that thought as far as how it might be scripted. Needing to take care of work-life balance. Maybe some of the ways that you managed your life slightly differently because you know what you need. When I think about the assumptions that others could be making, because they're looking at Dena, and they're looking at you and saying, okay, well, Dena, I've talked to you before. I've seen you before. You're excellent at your job. Like, you've raised children. Like, they make the assumptions that these things shouldn't be different, that you should be experiencing it in the same way that I experience some of these events. And that's got to be painful for an individual to know that, hold on, no, I know me, I know what I need. And your assumption is that I'm taking time off, or I don't want to work hard because I care about work-life balance, or some of these other concepts. What are some of the stereotypes that you've run into based off these assumptions that others have had because they don't understand what it is that maybe you need in order to be your best self?
It's been interesting to look at the contrast because in my son's case, I spent his whole school career until he got to high school and we got a really good program trying to convince people that he was intelligent enough,
Mhm.
that he was worthy of instruction, that he was capable of learning. But goofy things like, if you give my son an open-ended question on grade level, a test, he'll get about a 70 on it. If, however, you accommodate his expressive language difficulties by providing all of the words, but he
Mhm.
has to match them or connect the dots or do a multiple choice where he doesn't have to word search, he gets a 90 on the same test. So, it was never a question of whether he was learning. The problem was we had no way to capture it.
Yep.
And so I'm partially like geeked out researcher and partially proud mom, trying to figure out how a student could be academically neglected for the first 8 years of school and turn out to be on grade level when somebody
Mhm.
finally believes in him. I had the opposite problem. I was expected to do and perform at the same level as typical people. It's been said about me more than once that I'm harder on myself than anyone else. So I was very perfectionistic. But people just cannot, they can't hear me speak and still perceive me as disabled. And
Mhm.
so it does become quite a heavy lift to have to continue to remind people that even though my language is very developed, that it's all rehearsal and that I'm working very, very hard at it. And I'm still deconstructing this. We tend to want to project that once you've figured out your autism, life is good. And it's a lifelong process. It was
Mhm.
just a year ago that I was thinking about the construct around masking or camouflaging. And I was recognizing that in the IAC meetings, these very high level governmental meetings where we're advising the White House on what we think we need to work on for autism research, I'm masking my buns off, right? And I really went through like a little bit of an identity crisis. Am I being fake? Am I being a fraud? Am I not being authentic? Because authenticity is everything to me. And after I deconstructed it and played detective, I first of all recognized that everybody was doing the same thing.
Mhm. Yep.
Everybody in the room was masking because of the elevation of the meeting. What was different about it is it's harder for me. It's more effortful. What's different for me is in order to prepare to do that, I have to go in the day before. And to recover from that, I have to stay a day longer. I have
Mhm.
to stay overnight because I can't rush out to the airport because then I have nothing left for the rest of the week. And I also realized that I was choosing to mask as compared to defaulting to masking because of my status as an inferior person. It was
Mhm.
not about inferiority. It was about choosing to execute and mirror the behaviors and the language of the culture that I was immersed in for this short window of time for a day's work, and that I could make accommodations and supports to address that, right? That's very different than the first 30 years of my life, where I would just be completely worn out all the time, and I never understood why. So I'm just a big proponent of giving children language early on, helping them to understand what they're experiencing, because otherwise it's just painful and you don't have any words to explain it to yourself as well as to other people. So once I understood that everyone else was masking, that it was just a little more effortful for me, that I could ask for accommodations to prepare for that and recover from that, suddenly it's not as much of a barrier as it was, in prior experiences. My whole life is about that deconstruction and rebuilding, right? Because I didn't know who I was. I was so busy being other people, mimicking other personality types, whether it was my brother or my pastor or, someone else in my life, that I hadn't really found out who I was until about 10 or 12 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, just even the way that we're talking about masking as being a tool that is used and used purposefully for whatever meeting, whatever you're trying to portray, versus something that is almost forced upon you because you're being told that if you don't mask, you can't be successful, or if you don't mask, you'll never be able to fit into the community around you. Those are two very different perspectives. But that might be the perspective of somebody who's living a neurodivergent life and doesn't have the right supports of saying, I can't be the true, genuine self that I'd like to be, versus being able to be somebody who gets the benefit of the doubt that may be neurotypical, because I guarantee I mask all the time as well. And yet it's a tool for me. It's something that I'm doing because it's helpful, it's useful. Yet there's not that almost hidden part of me or shame that I'm feeling on any given aspect of I can't be myself. And that's hard. And I think a lot of that's come through research. A lot of it has come through being more aware as a community of being able to understand perspectives and see that different people are experiencing life differently. But inclusive research around the autism and the neurodivergent community has not been funded well. We don't have a lot of information, is that our research has been very focused on a very small subset of the population of autistics that are receiving early intervention service for a very specific reason. So when we're trying to make it more inclusive, when we're trying to look at all the nuances of life, all the different experiences of life with neurodivergence and with the autistic community in specific, it's how important is it that we're looking to answer a variety of questions and inform on a variety of experiences, not only to the autistic individual themselves, but to society at large, as we're looking at funding research projects or looking at answering or informing on different questions?
Well, I think the first thing we need to explode is the myth around how rare autism is. I'm by training a social worker. I drive a Prius. I'm loyal to the social work model. But I keep trying to convey to my community of human services providers that whatever field that you practice, whether you're working with the unhoused, whether you're working with individuals who are Indigenous or transgender, or whether you're working with people who are recovering from domestic violence, or people who are aging, whatever population you feel is your expert field, if you don't know anything about autism, you are underserving or even maltreating someone within your field. And so I think the first tier is to make sure that anyone who provides human services or medical or dental or vision care, anybody who could interact with us in terms of legal services or people who do emergency mental health care, there needs to be a massive amount of training to understand the nuances and the diversity that autism includes. That's step one. It's not rare. It's happening in every element of every population. And then I think the next tier is creating neurodivergent friendly and comprehensive employment practices, and not just those services you get when you try to onboard, but as a continuity and a caring of your community. We have an extremely neurodivergent workforce here in the Life Course Outcomes Lab, and it's not something we settled for. It was something we did with intentionality, because having people who can wear, I mean, I have too many hats. I'm married to a neurodivergent man. We have a very unique lifestyle. We live in different states and we're both happier for it. I have a son and a daughter who present very differently, and having all of that lived experience, practice experience, multiple clients in my past, my social work training, and all of that in one person who can also talk about lived experience makes me an asset, not a problem. And so seeing it through that lens, I think, has greatly enhanced our particular lab. And I think it's evident in the research we're producing. We're doing incredible work here at Drexel, in all of our labs in the AJ Drexel Institute. But I can speak really personally about my lab. I've been here since August, and I feel like I've died and gone to employment heaven. Of course, it's not perfect, but they're asking for engagement to make it more inclusive and to make it better. And that's an honor to just be someplace that's committed to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and having that diversity of thought and diversity of how people are processing through different projects or different research, it brings about better ideas. It brings about more conversation and more challenging of the system, and to be able to think through problems maybe you wouldn't have thought about historically because they weren't brought up. But there's inherent barriers that exist right now, because I don't know that we have enough autistic scholars that are getting the support. I don't think that we have enough autistic individuals that are working within the professional communities to be able to shape some of those thought processes, or to be able to help us to enhance some of the policies and enhance some of the projects that we're working on. What are some of the barriers that you're seeing? And I mean, how can academia or how can the professional world help to address them to start to remove some of these barriers?
Well, we have organized bodies here at Drexel, and we meet weekly to monthly, depending on the group. And we work very diligently to try to recommend policies and procedures to make things go smoother for our community. But it's the little moments, honestly, Jeff. I was in a meeting this week, and we use community engaged research almost exclusively in our lab. And one of the members of our community is in Texas. And we do something before every meeting. At the beginning, we do something called an access check-in. And it's a tip of the hat to social justice. It helps us take a pulse of everyone's individual time and frame. And she shared a very emotional disclosure about her distress about what they've borne witness to there in her community. And we just stopped the meeting and loved on her. And then we took a 5-minute break to hold space for her. And then after we did that, we got into the body of the meeting. And she was the one that was a driving force. We were trying to create a written document, a procedure document. And we were talking about an easy read version versus the academic version. And she said, why? And I said, why do we need both? Why can't we just do something that's accessible for everyone? And she said, if we accommodate those with the highest needs from the beginning, we can scaffold up from there. And it just stopped the meeting, right? It just stopped the meeting. It was like, this is so much just basic common sense when it comes to accessibility. Those are the moments we hold on to, where we see so much, and everybody in the group was like, oh, wow, that makes so much sense. Why didn't we think of this sooner? And we did. We're proceeding based on her recommendation. That's true community engaged research, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just the experience that you probably had raising two neurodivergent children has given you the perspective to understand how much somebody who's neurodivergent can actually enhance the process, can help to educate you on how you can be better at being able to communicate or engaging in the world around you. What are some of the other components? Because your son, you said, was at Marshall and is doing wonderfully, or is kind of in the process of taking the next step into his professional career. But your advocacy is probably something that's going to be needed for others going forward, because his experience, he had the support of you. Not everybody gets that. So what drove, some of the ongoing thoughts that you have as far as being able to position yourself to advocate for more opportunity for folks that maybe are experiencing that transition like your son, or for others who maybe are just misunderstood within the workplace? What is it that you're doing now to be able to help support them?
Well, currently, I think the research we're doing is very relevant. I'm a PI on a project we're just getting underway in August, where we're going to be trying to measure how we can get people in a room to have difficult conversations. I think the silos within the autism community are our own worst enemies. And it doesn't have to be that way. I've been to DC with a friend whose son is suffering many medical issues. He is non-speaking. He cannot live in a group environment because he has behaviors that are difficult to manage. And she sat next to me in DC and advocated for better transition services for people who present like my son. And I advocated for him not to ever have to be evaluated again. His status is not going to change. And lots of people make a ton of money on absurd assessments for people whose lives are pretty determined for themselves. It can be done in partnership like that. We can be allies, but if we continue to project that autism is different in different people, instead of recognizing that all of the features of autism exist in every individual, but the amount of distress that causes is what's different. The amount of supports and services they require is what's different. Until we can unify on that baseline, everybody wins but us. So we have to start coming together as a community and unify for shared needs and supports.
Is the big barrier right there the fact that everybody's competing for resources, and it's hard to be able to sit back and not advocate for a position that you feel like is being under-resourced, where almost everybody that is neurodivergent or that is not neurodivergent is going to benefit from some of the resources that are out there, and we're constraining them right now?
Well, I think we base a lot of service delivery based on subjective observation. You look disabled, so we're going to give you more things. And trust me, I believe people who have the highest support needs need even more support than they're getting, even though they get a tremendous amount. But there also needs to be room for the reality that if you're diagnosed with autism, you're disabled. And if you're disabled, you deserve to have some services. Now, for my girlfriend's son, he needs 24-hour-a-day support. For other people, one of my colleagues who works for Vanderbilt is a young woman who's autistic. She lives with a roommate and she gets a lot of community-based services to keep her active and engaged in the community. She needs about 25 hours a week. My son could benefit from 10 hours a week. I'd kill to have, the Rosie the robot from the Jetsons to just come and clean my house once a month, right? That could be life-changing for me. And so we need to recognize that everybody in that continuum needs services, but it's a matter of intensity and frequency that varies. But if we do that us-them competition and, we continue to categorize people instead of looking at their individual unique needs, people are going to continue to suffer what you see in the research, suicidal thinking. They're going to be experiencing being unhoused. They're going to experience victimization because of their vulnerabilities. Like, all of those things are going to be happening at greater frequency if we don't stop competing for face time and focus on getting everyone what they need.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that there's a scarcity of resources. I think there's a denial of access to services. And if we were just, making sure everybody paid their fair share, there'd be more than enough for everyone's needs.
Yeah, and maybe I had misspoken, and it's more the scarcity of willingness to give the resources. That's the way I might have been able to phrase it there. But as you kind of talk through a lot of that, it kind of gives me a little bit of fear, is that, the gatekeepers to decide what somebody really needs isn't oftentimes the individual in support with those that are involved with their caretaking. It could be a physician, it could be a social worker, it could be a therapist of some sort, it could be a family member. It's oftentimes those resources are left to folks that don't really see the whole picture and are looking at a budget to be able to understand what's allocated to somebody. Is there something on the advocacy level, as we start to be able to look at voices and being able to kind of make sure that everybody's experience is heard, that we're also helping to educate policymakers, educate decision makers on, funds and availability of those willingness to give away the resources, that needs to be done simultaneously?
Well, I kind of approach that from two different levels. Of course, in my federal policy work, I want to see the research dollars delineated based on the frequency of autism. So if 25% of the population has the highest support needs, they should be represented in the research at that percentage level. And they're currently not. They're not represented at that 25% level. On the other hand, that doesn't mean the other 75% could be left in the dust. And so I think that they should be getting their 75%. I also do systems navigation research. I try to find out how the system works and then again deconstruct it and rebuild what systems navigators at nonprofits or support group model programming can do to expedite people through the systems. If I was the queen of all things and I could wave a magic wand, the systems would just be accessible and transparent, but they're not. They're currently manipulative and deceptive, and they're their own industry. When you think about all of the people who get paid money to keep you from getting Social Security disability, and that they're feeding their families on your suffering, it's pretty insulting. And so we've either got to expedite people through the system or we've got to break the system and rebuild it. And I don't see the second half happening anytime soon. So I'm trying to work on it on the other end, on the consumer side.
Yeah. And I mean, the more that we empower people with knowledge and empower people with just understanding of the process of how it's actually working, is that it'll start getting other people asking a variety of questions and bring about new advocates, bring about new researchers. So what advice would you be giving to these folks that, I mean, you right now have this network, you have this ability to have some outreach, but we need to encourage others to be able to have that same voice, to be able to kind of create a way to be able to make themselves heard. So what do you advise for new advocates, new researchers that are looking to make a difference?
Gosh, I wish I had some grand wisdom about that, but I don't. I think the first thing we need to do is we need to rebuild conferences, in-person conferences. I know we provided a lot of accessibility to people who otherwise couldn't attend an in-person event, and that was wonderful. But there is nothing like finding your people. We used to go to conferences put on by the Autism Society of America. That's actually where I got my advocacy start. And that was my community that helped me find a diagnostician and helped me network with other women who presented like me and made me feel less othered, you know.
Hmm.
I'll never forget my first conference where I had been diagnosed and I hadn't started disclosing. I hadn't navigated that yet. And my friend Stephen Short took me to the autism room and they went, well, she's not autistic. And he goes, well, yes, she is. And they go, oh, okay. Like, wow, you know, why can't it be that easy anywhere? And to
Hmm.
not have that summer camp experience is what we used to call it, of coming together with the same people every year. It's a real loss. One of my friends from college is currently at the chromosome disorder conference, and there's 400 people there that they've known their entire child's lives that are helping them, navigate the world, and we need more of that. So if I could pick one thing, that would be my one thing.
That's a great thing to pick. I mean, it brings the opportunity to have those tough discussions. It brings opportunity to have some coalescence around the fact that there's some shared experiences. But it's also looking at the fact that, our shared experiences aren't shared to the same extent that this is the only experience, is that we all are unique in the way that we're needing to be able to kind of look at what's valuable to us, where our values are, what's the resource that's going to most help support my child, and how do we work through being able to access that. And it brings a community together to be able to understand that there are diverse needs. So you've done a lot of work on being able to promote these conversations, to promote dialogue, to educate, to make people aware. You've done it on so many different levels. So what do you hope that your legacy is going to bring about for autism advocacy? And I mean, all the work that you've done, what are you hoping to kind of leave for the rest of us to kind of pick up and take for you?
Well, I've been very fortunate to have had a couple of young people that I got to nurture from the very beginning. My friend at Vanderbilt started out intimidated about even coming through the door to her first conference. And I've been nudging her along the way. And my friend Chloe Rothschild has now spoken at the United Nations about people who use verbal and augmentative communication. She joined me initially on the board of directors for the ARC-US, and then she became the co-chair of the Self-Advocacy Committee. I pulled back, she stepped in, and now she has been on the board with Pablo Juarez, who's at Vanderbilt, and Pablo recruited her to be a research assistant for Vanderbilt. So that's what gives me my joy, is watching the people that I've mentored along the way continue to grow and evolve. And I continue, I have a kind of bougie office because I need certain lighting and certain silence and all those things. And they're gracious enough to give me that. But I have a couch and I have a big quilt and I have cozy pillows. And it's a landing place for our younger researchers who just need a place sometimes to come in and vent,
Mhm.
and to just have somewhere to go. It's everything from those small mentoring aspects to these larger mentoring aspects. It's hard for me not to do clinical and individual work because it can be very rewarding. But I also feel that when I do this big picture work, if you will, the macro level work, that I'm actually influencing more lives, and I have to keep reminding myself that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it just when you're talking about some of the influence that you've had through mentoring others and being able to help people realize that it's not a linear process, I think it's you're going to have your ups and downs,
That's
and
right.
helping to problem solve through that, because I think oftentimes we give up if we're hitting too many barriers, but this is a field of barriers that need to be broken down. So it's going to take time. It's going to take effort. So I appreciate everything that you've been able to do, and hopefully your mentors, your mentees, I mean, are able to kind of take that and be able to continue to challenge us to make things better and challenge us to be a part of the process going forward. How can families get involved? How can you how what are the resources that families can turn to be able to maintain their advocacy for their unique needs for their individual child?
Well, it is very difficult. I have legitimately a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder from the secondary implications of fighting to get my son through school. And I've opted out of any school-based work because it was soul-sucking. And although I'm very happy, there was a cost. I had a second child whose needs were clearly not met because I was busy doing that. And I also modeled for her unintentionally a level of autonomy and independence that I think isn't always healthy from where I am now. Since I started in the field as a professional, for the first time in my life, I started meeting people who mentored me, people who were women that were strong, powerful activists. And it just has expanded my quality of life so much to have this wide array of people who nurtured me through this dissertation and nurtured me through the research process and supported me through the whole process. And so that's why I try to give back to other peers that may not have been able to benefit from any of that earlier on. But I do think that going forward, we just have to find community. In Nashville, we had two different support groups when my kid was in school there. We had the Merides moms, who were the women who went to breakfast and had coffee and talked about school advocacy. And then I ran a group called Margarita Moms. and it was everything but that. We went to see Magic Mike together, and we helped each other out when our houses flooded, and we became that culture and that family for the women who had done their grieving and now they're just coping, right? And they needed a girls' night out. Like, we lose out on that relational part of life. And women need women, and that's how we're hardwired. So it's very important to get involved at the community level, and also to just love your child unconditionally, and know that you're doing the best you can with whatever resources you have. I also am a little less flip about it, but the truth of the matter is, it sounds like everything went so well, but it didn't. When my daughter left for college, my son and I relocated twice to find a public school that thought he could learn. I had to leave my husband for all that time. I haven't moved back home since then. And we're happy this way because he's an introvert and a minimalist, and I'm an extrovert and a maximalist. And it's not good to live together when you're that dynamically different, but we still unconditionally love each other and our children. And so that's the basis of our relationship. But, it's just so much better when we have that culture and we have that community to get us through these unusual things we have to do to get our kids through. And so I tell people, I know it sounds outrageous and I know not everybody can do it, but when you find a system, a school system that will support your child and believe in them and they're adequately staffed, go. I spent the first 10 years of my son's schooling fighting for them to do the right thing. And if they don't want your child, you can't make that happen. You can put all the due processes and all those procedures in place. And what they're going to do is they're going to make it take so long that it's too late. And so I tell people, as soon as you have a child with special needs, the first inkling you get that there's an administrator standing in your way, leave, because they're just going to make your child's life miserable. My son was stalked by one of his teachers and harassed by him every day. You can't make those kind of people do right. Yeah. So, it doesn't mean you failed. It just means you have to find a better place for your kid.
Yeah. And when you're describing that entire process, I'm thinking that there's not a singular community that's doing that. You have to be able to broaden your communities. You have to be able to know, I need this group. I need this support for this. I need this other support to be able to help me with this, or to be a part of my experience with this. In the perspective that you gave on battling, it's something maybe I can't wrap my mind around of being able to sacrifice that current status quo of where my life is and uproot it is sometimes better than struggling through and having to battle on a daily basis. And it's hearing from people that maybe have experienced that would even get me to think about a concept like that, versus actually being able to kind of get my roots stuck and saying, no, I gotta weather the storm. I gotta keep digging it out, and realizing that there are other options, but only community brings about that discussion. Only community will share somebody else's experience to help me broaden my thought process on some of these issues. Well, Dena, I appreciate so much of what you've shared today. I think that you've added so much to just the dialogue and the research and the advocacy that's happening for the neurodivergent community. Where can people access some of the material that you're working on, or to be able to learn about some of the results of the research or the projects that are upcoming?
Well, Drexel is very, very active on LinkedIn. I also have a business page that I operate called the Center for Understanding on Facebook. And, between those two locations, you can stay pretty current on what's happening. We have two other divisions here, childhood and early identification. In the Institute, we also have a division that works on transition to adulthood and young adulthood. And so anytime we're looking to fill a position, or we're recruiting a community advisory board, or we're looking to just inform people about research outcomes, we put them for sure in those two places. So that's the easiest place to stay on touch with what's happening at Drexel.
I recommend to our listeners that they reach out for these resources, because it's definitely going to broaden some of the ideas and perspectives that they walk away with. And once again, Dena, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your time with us.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.